Hello, everyone. It is Super Bowl week, and welcome to another episode of Very Cold Lasagna, the podcast that is a safe and open listening platform for casual, cold, and all the dumb takes on the world of pro wrestling and sports. I'm your host, Dylan Lasagna. Welcome to episode 90 of this freezing cold podcast that houses that very icy and spicy lasagna. But here, on this episode, we're actually talking about one of the teams that was just close, but not close enough to make it to the Super Bowl, and that is my favorite team. That is the San Francisco 49ers, and we're going to be talking about their 2021 season and recapping it here on today's show. Before we get into all that, though, I do want to ask, did anyone watch the Pro Bowl on Sunday this past weekend? Did anyone really have any care in the world to watch this thing? Like, really? Did anyone? Because from what I've seen on Twitter, it just looked like they were playing tag. It looked like they were playing Sarcastaball. For all my South Park fans, it looked like they were playing Sarcastaball for 3 hours straight. It literally did. It literally looked like real life Sarcastaball for 3+ hours. It was so lame. Like, sure, I get, like, they're trying to protect the players, but it just looked so lame. And not only that, it just looked so lifeless. There's constant scoring. I mean, sure, it's like that in the NFL in a regular season game, but I don't know. It just didn't feel like an all-star game. I mean, neither is any of the all-star games in the other leagues, but at least with the NBA, sure, there's a lot of high scoring, no defense, but at least they give you a little of incentive to watch the game. It's like, oh, is Team LeBron or Team like Curry gonna win this game for X charity? At least with the NBA All-Star game, they give you some stakes to actually care for this game. With the Pro Bowl, what's there really to care about? What honest to God is there to care about with the Pro Bowl other than seeing like certain players being on the field one last time for all to see in the last for the next 7 months? Really, what is the new great thing about the Pro Bowl these days? I mean, when if I remember correctly, with the Pro Bowl in previous years, like decades before this shit, the Pro Bowl was in Hawaii, and it was after the Super Bowl, and for the Super Bowl players, it was like a vacation for some of them. And even like before, when they moved the Pro Bowl to a week before the Super Bowl, which in my opinion, when I look back on it, it seemed like a stupid move. And, looking at it now, it still is. In my opinion, it's like at least having the Pro Bowl in Hawaii, at least gives like the players like a little vacation. Like those playing in the Pro Bowl, it gives them a little vacation, go to all these like islands, all these hot spots. Like, where do you get that? When you go to Florida or Vegas, it's like pretty much all these places that you already play in when you go play in the regular season. Like, really, like what's so different about playing the Pro Bowl in, let's say, in a Las Vegas or in a Tampa, Florida, or in where else? Like, let's say Los Angeles. Let's say SoFi had the Pro Bowl in the next couple of years. Like, what's different? What honestly is different having the Pro Bowl like in a stadium where like games are held in the regular season? Like, I guess that's the good thing about having the Pro Bowl in Hawaii. Not only was it a vacation spot, but it's somewhere that normally doesn't hold NFL games during the regular season. So, I don't know. There's just not much incentive, not much like destination location, I guess, with the Pro Bowl. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. But I don't know. Did anyone really manage to care for the Pro Bowl this year or at all in years past? I'd love to hear. I'd love to like hear some thoughts on that. But anyway, we're not here to talk about the Pro Bowl any longer because I don't really give a shit about it. We're here to talk about my San Francisco 49ers. Yes, it seemed like a nightmare at first to start the season for the San Francisco 49ers, but they trucked along and made this delusional playoff push that managed to go all the way to the NFC Championship game, and that was their 2021 season. And I gotta say, when I look back at this 2021 season for the San Francisco 49ers, it's kind of like, it's kind of, I guess you could call it a climax for the last 2 years. If you want to count 2018 too, it's kind of like a culmination of the last 3 years for San Francisco as well. And I'll explain more in a bit. But, as we went into this season for San Francisco, there was all the talk about, when is Trey Lance going to start? The Niners gave up 3 first-round picks almost last year to get the third overall pick. They selected Trey Lance, not Mac Jones, and they go and get Trey Lance, and then all this talk starts about, when is Trey Lance eventually going to supplant the usual starter, Jimmy Garoppolo? And then, obviously, that never happens, at least for, most of the season. And then they just go wrong, business as usual, and then they get to the NFC Championship game. So, that's why I see it as a climax, you get to their quarterback, and then things happen, and then we're here to talk about it at the end of the season. But no, seriously, when you look at their last 2 seasons, 2019 was kind of like their best season since 2012. And especially what happened the year prior, where they were coming off that terrible, terrible year where they lost their recently acquired Jimmy Garoppolo to the ACL tear they suffered in Kansas City. And prior to the ACL tear, Jimmy G was actually playing relatively decent. He was actually playing really, really above average or to borderline good football. I mean, when you look at pre-ACL Jimmy, he actually could move out of the pocket and he was kind of mobile, but I think really the ACL kind of fucked him up. He kind of made him scared to run the football or move out of the pocket. But even then, this 2019 season where they went 13-3, Jimmy G had a relatively decent year. He got some key wins that the Niners won because of him over the Rams twice, the Green Bay Packers, in the New Orleans Saints, and the Seattle Seahawks in the season finale to clinch the top seed. And, not only that, he was complemented by a very strong running game that became, well known during the NFC Championship game against the Packers, especially by Raheem Mostert. And he had a strong receiving core that was headlined by the midseason acquisition of Emmanuel Sanders, who's now on the Buffalo Bills. And then you had a rookie at the time, Deebo Samuel. Then you had another strong receiving core of Kendrick Bourne. And then you had George Kittle, who was in his 3rd year. But the biggest strength of that team in 2019 was their defense. You had a really good defensive line with then rookie Nick Bosa with that number 2 overall pick. And then you got DeForest Buckner, man, he was like a beast in that D-line. And then Eric Armstead. And then your reserve rotations, Sheldon Day, D Ford, Solomon Thomas. And then, unlike in this past season, back in 2019, you had a much stronger secondary. You had the Fred Warner, who didn't peak yet, but he was still a pretty solid linebacker leading that core. You also had Jimmy Ward, Manuel Mosley still back there playing corner, in the rotation that was led by Richard Sherman. So, they dominated the NFC playoffs, and then they meet Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. They come up a little bit short, and we all remember what happens with that overthrow to Emmanuel Sanders. And yeah, things happen. They blew that 10-point lead against Mahomes. So, they just came up short in Super Bowl 54. And then 2020 happens, and then we all knew what was going to happen. Here we are talking about their 2020 season briefly. A year later, after I went over it extensively on the 10th episode of this podcast, injury mania ran wild. The Super Bowl loser's curse lived on, and it ran rapidly in Santa Clara. Because obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic was still running wild. It was still affecting everybody. But it really hurt the most in Santa Clara. But, the Super Bowl losers curse, going back to that, it really affected the 49ers like big time because, in week 2 of the New York Jets in New York against the Jets, that was just the beginning of the end for the 49ers season. They lose Nick Bosa, they lose Solomon Thomas to season-ending ACL tears, and then Jimmy G and Raheem Mostert suffered high ankle sprains. It eventually sidelined them for the rest of the season, and then George Kittle also gets sidelined with his own ankle sprain in the Week 8 game against Seattle. But then he returns when the team was already well out of playoff contention because I guess he wanted to play. So throughout the year, many injuries continue to pile up for the 49ers. I guess it set the precedent for next year because the Baltimore Ravens would have that injury mania down in Baltimore. So they also had like many embarrassing losses too. The Eagles, the Dolphins, back to back, and then a couple weeks later, the Seahawks, the Packers, the Saints, all 3 in a row. But in spite of all those embarrassing losses, it could have been worse. They could have went like 3-13, 4-12, like the 2003 Oakland Raiders after losing big in the Super Bowl to the Bucks. But they all in all, despite all those embarrassing losses, they went 6-10. I mean, sure, nothing right hope about. Still a double-digit losing season, but in all honesty, for a Super Bowl like losers curse, it could have gone well worse than that, in spite of all the injuries. And there were still a couple of positives in that 2020 season. The former defensive coordinator Robert Saleh, he was really amping up his players, whatever he had left of them. He had Kerry Hyder Jr., Javon Kinlaw, the rookie first-round pick in 2020. Fred Warner, he had peaked into an all-pro linebacker. And, you get 2 upset wins in the back half of the season over the Rams in Week 12 and then the Cardinals in Week 16. That Week 16 win against Arizona, it would be the catalyst for the Cardinals' elimination in the following week from playoff contention. But still, the Niners were still the most bad luck, injury-riddled team in 2020. Aside from the fact that, they had the least recovery because they went to the Super Bowl just like months before. And then the COVID-19 pandemic happens. It affects training camp, off-season team activities. Yeah, it's just, the Niners were just, lacking conditioning. They were lacking resources. They couldn't meet up together like in person until like well before the season started. So they were just affected by bad luck and lack of resources in 2020. So 6-10, last in the NFC West. I mean, it could have been so much worse. They could have went again well below that. So they went into this 2021 offseason mainly by retaining key players. 2020, their offseason, it was more so like trying to solidify that core. Although they did manage to lose DeForest Buckner. But they did manage to get Trent Williams, their left tackle. A key piece of that offensive line they get, but they lose a key piece to their defensive line. So going to this all-important 2021 offseason, like I said, all about retaining their key players. They didn't have much cap room to work with because of some kind of bad contracts with Jimmy G, D Ford. At the time, also Eric Armstead, but he managed to restructure it, I think, if my memory serves correct. But still, you have a couple of bad contracts, leaving you with not much cap room to work with. But still, you managed to re-sign the likes of Trent Williams to give him a big extension while giving everybody else some short-term extensions like Emmanuel Mosley, Marcel Harris, Jaquaski Tart. I'm not sure who else they gave some to. But they also extended George Kittle and Fred Warner during the offseason. But the biggest story of the offseason for the 49ers was John Lynch's his big gamble to trade 3 first-round picks, including the one that they were going to have at number 12 initially in the 2021 draft, to go get much higher in the draft, do a pick swap with the Miami Dolphins, and trade for that number 3 pick that they owned. And then the Miami Dolphins would have the pick for, well, this year and next year for the 49ers in the first round. And, well, let's just say Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch made their intentions very clear what that head coaching and general manager duo were going to do on draft day, on day one. They were going to select the quarterback. They were going to find the guy that was going to replace, eventually, Jimmy Garoppolo. And, like, I will say this about Jimmy G, you know, for as... I'll give you this disclaimer now. For as bad as he is, as a player, as when I say bad, I mean limited. He is a professional. He is a team player. He is a team leader. I will give him that. He is a cool dude. I will give him that much. But in the end of the day, he has his limitations. He's not the guy to lead this team long term. Again, had he not injured his ACL, who knows? Maybe he could have. But after that ACL tear, man, he just been playing. He just played scared. He just plays scared, and you know, things change on a whim. But anyway, the intention was clear. Shanahan and John Lynch were going to select the quarterback. They made it that damn near clear. And, you know, Jimmy was like well in communication with Shanahan and Lynch, at least on that. So after a month of speculation, who was it going to be? Everyone thought it was going to be Mac Jones from Alabama. But no. On draft day, it was instead North Dakota State's Trey Lance. And unlike Mac Jones, who was at the time, and, you know, he still kind of is, more NFL ready, Trey Lance is a very raw prospect. He doesn't have much starting experience. He didn't play that many games in North Dakota State, but he has very high athletic, and you know, he's a very, very smart quarterback. So he had a lot of upside, but it was kind of clear that he needed at least a year to redshirt. You know, in other words, you know, he needed a year to sit and learn. So the speculation began of when and if, and yes, that speculation still began nonetheless, of whether Trey Lance would play over Jimmy Garoppolo in the 2021 season, by many fans, including myself, when Trey would start, if and when. But, you know, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch were like, no, Jimmy's still our starting quarterback for the 2021 season, and they made it very clear that there wasn't going to be a competition unless, you know, something happened to Jimmy, whether it be injury or, you know, they're on a downward trend. So then we get to the 2021 season, you know, they start a 2-game road trip against Detroit, Philadelphia, you know, they handled the Lions pretty well for 3 quarters, but then things kind of went off the rails, especially on defense, and that's when you start to see the cracks on that secondary begin to fall. Keep in mind that they re-signed corner Jason Verrett. It's like for another 1-year prove-it deal, see if he could stay healthy. And turns out he couldn't. He could not stay healthy. He could not stay healthy for 1 game because he tore his ACL during that game. And that secondary, without Jason Verrett, and even without Jason Verrett sometimes during that game, the secondary gave up a lot of big plays to Jared Goff. Yes, Jared Goff, of all quarterbacks. So losing Jason Verrett was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back for that secondary, because the Lions would score 16 straight on the 49ers before, you know, Jared goofed things up at the very end. And, you know, the Niners would win that game, but, you know, kind of a disappointing way to almost louse that up. So you still get a solid game from Jimmy G in the linebacking group, but still, that secondary really fell apart at the very end. But even then, you know, you get a better win against Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles the following week. But again, that secondary really started to show cracks in this 49ers team. They just signed Josh Norman during that time to replace Jason Verrett, but damn, you really start to see the cracks in that. You really started to see that fail because, yeah, if they didn't see the tape from the Buffalo Bills secondary last season, yeah, they knew Josh Norman got his ass trucked by Derrick Henry and he was giving up a lot of big plays during his time in Buffalo. Yet they still managed to sign him off the street. His washed ass, bum ass. And even then, despite all that, the Eagles were making a lot of mistakes during that game that the 49ers barely capitalized on. And, they start the season 2-0 against some pretty mediocre teams, which then proceeded to a very downward period for the 49ers, where they went 1-5 by week 10. And this is because of their limitations. The only time that they won during this 1-5 stretch was when they went up to Chicago in week 8 to play some Bears football and beat up on Justin Fields. But man, those 5 losses were not good. Not good at all for 49ers fans. Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers lit up the 49ers single-handedly. Yes, those two alone. Even if it was a close game. Yeah, you don't want Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams to be torching their asses on your home turf. Because that's what the 49ers secondary did in week 3 in their home opener. And then you also saw Jimmy G in that offense give A-Rod and the pack too much time by scoring too quickly. And that's what Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams responded in kind. They burned the clock. They continued to torch the 49ers and got a game-winning field goal and maybe the Niners on their turf. And then the next week, the 49ers do a strong start to open the game against the Seattle Seahawks, but then the offense went ice cold against that Seattle defense. And for a Niners team, for Niners defense, a defensive line that really had the lockdown on Russell Wilson, they really didn't do anything since that opening drive because, Jimmy G couldn't execute plays after the opening touchdown. And then he eventually gets hurt again. He injured his ankle, so Trey Lance has to finish the second half. And, he does, he does so-so. He does, in relief. I mean, again, it's expected because he doesn't really have a grasp on the playbook yet. And he's coming in an emergency time. He tries to get the 49ers up, but they fall short. And also remember that game against the Seahawks where they were turning the ball over a lot before Trey Lance came into the game. So anyway, speaking of Trey Lance, he was limited to just quarterback draws, running the ball himself by Kyle Shanahan, in week 5 against the Arizona Cardinals, who were undefeated at the time. And Murray and that Arizona offense, they were pretty limited themselves. The 49ers defense really had the brakes on Murray, but again, wasted by Shanahan's questionable decision to just have Trey Lance limited to just run pass options or QB draws for most of the game. So they go to the bye, time to refresh your memory, recharge the batteries, make some adjustments on the team. But then, some embarrassing losses happen, So you get to play the Colts on Sunday Night Football, but then you get rained on. You literally get rained on, not just by Mother Nature, but by your own secondary, because they allowed yet more big plays, and they get arrested by NFL officiating. And not just because the NFL officiating crew wanted to throw flags, because the secondary didn't know how to properly cover Michael Pittman Jr. So they were just like, oh, let's just drag him down, or let's just hold him until we get caught for pass interference. Let's get arrested. Let's get arrested for pass interference. So that's exactly what the 49ers secondary did all game long. Emmanuel Mosley, K'Wan Williams, I don't know if Jimmy Ward played in that game, but Josh Norman, all the corners, they decided to let's commit enough, let's do enough to take ourselves to officiating jail for pass interference. And Jimmy G again played a very poor game. He had a lot of high throws, and he had 2 costly fumbles, and obviously the cherry on top, the interception to end an embarrassing game in a wet one to the Colts after the bye. Like I said before, again, your only win during this stretch was against the Bears football against the Chicago in week 8. But then right after that, another embarrassing clunker against the Cardinals team that had no Kyler Murray, no DeAndre Hopkins, no AJ Green, and no JJ Watt because they were out with injury at the time. They get embarrassed, yes, by Colt McCoy and James Conner single-handedly. Yes, no kidding. A Niners team that has its starters get embarrassed. They every single one of them got embarrassed by a Cardinals G League team in week 9. So, man, during that stretch, people were already wondering. Is it time for the Niners to turn to Trey Lance? Is it time to, get him some starting experience? And, at some point you had to, I was kind of thinking, I don't know if I said it back then. I think at some point you had to, especially, going into the next game against the LA Rams, if they got destroyed in that game or lost that game too, whether in which way or at whatever, maybe they should turn to Trey Lance. Even Kyle Shanahan said himself in his exit interview, I think at some point, if they had lost the game to LA, they were going to turn to Trey Lance. They were going to turn to him because the season was done. It seemed to be done for them. So it was not just because, Jimmy was injured, because his limitations were at an all-time high. Slow to read incoming pressure, slow to read the defense. He only saw one read. And because of that, he would eat the sack or get the ball out too early, and that would result in a turnover. And like I said, pre-ACL Jimmy would run out of the pocket. Pre-ACL Jimmy would try to run out of the pocket for a first down. I mean, yeah, he's not much of a mobile quarterback, but at least pre-ACL Jimmy for the 6 games he played in 2017 to the 3 games in 2018, he was at least he showed some mobility. But this Jimmy that we saw since then, nothing close to that. Nothing close to the one we traded for in 2017. So, again, calls for Jimmy to be benched in favor of Trey Lance, especially if they lost to the matchup in week 10 against the Rams. And, defensively, the secondary was giving up a lot of big plays still, especially because, they lacked a lockdown corner, and, its defensive schemes, failed. It really failed against the receivers they faced, whether it's big or small. The secondary was giving up a lot of big plays. So either way, they were at the midway point of the season, 3-5, and by week 10, it seemed like the Niners were ready to shift towards developing the rookies, especially Trey Lance. But first, they had to take care of some business on Monday night against Matthew Stafford and the LA Rams. But instead, that matchup would actually begin towards something else, because most people like me predicted the Niners would be the victims of a Monday Night Massacre. If you all remember that episode where I previewed this matchup, I thought it was gonna be an LA Rams takeover at Levi Stadium, not because the fan base, no, LA can never replicate that, but what I mean by on the field, the Rams, who had just acquired Von Miller and Odell Beckham Jr., this LA Rams team had the potential to dominate this Niners team. But then the Monday night game happens. The Monday Night Massacre happens. Just not in the way you imagined. The Niners defense takes down Matthew Stafford with some sacks, and they net a pick 6 on him in an opening drive interception. And then on offense, they take a new approach. They really focus on the run game. That would be the catalyst for the rest of the season. And then they use Jimmy Garoppolo when necessary. That's literally all it is. And then for at least a month, they would use this burn the clock, score points, burn the clock so we could score some points approach. And it was like a total beatdown. It was a total slow approach beatdown by the 49ers, 31-10. And that would serve as like the building block towards a playoff push that no one would really see happening, at least at the time. So during this stretch, they would go 7-2. Literally, yeah, they went 7-2 to nab the last playoff spot. But, you lose some winnable games against a beat-up Seahawks team by week 13. Russell Wilson clearly not fully recovered from a thumb injury. And, their Seahawks secondary still sucks ass themselves. And then week 16, before Christmas, you get an offensively challenged Titans team without Derrick Henry, but Jimmy G is just as offensively challenged, if not more, than the Tennessee Titans. But still, you get some critical victories during this time. You get victories against the Minnesota Vikings in week 12, the Atlanta Falcons in week 15, and then the week before that, a bounce back win in yet a critical one in week 14 against the eventual AFC champions, the Cincinnati Bengals, and Joe Burrow. But it was also during that game in Tennessee where Jimmy G would suffer a injury to his thumb in his throwing hand, and that would eventually play a role in his throwing motion and how much Kyle Shanahan would lessen his emphasis on the pass in the playoffs. So for a game, at least, the Niners actually had to go to Trey Lance. They had to have him start again in relief of the injured Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't going to be ready in time when the Niners had to face the Houston Texans for their home finale in week 17. So they need to hit the emergency button for Trey Lance. We need the Trey, damn it. So at least this time around, Kyle Shanahan, after a half of seeing Trey Lance try to do the same thing he did against Arizona, he finally opened up the damn, even if it's condensed, playbook for Trey Lance. They let him throw the ball, and goddamn, he torched that secondary in the second half, and they routed the Texans 22-7. So Trey Lance does his job in week 17. But then you get to week 18. You go back to Jimmy Garoppolo. Clearly not 100%. He has tape wrapped around his thumb. He was total shit. And so was the rest of the team, too. They were giving up big plays to Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp. They're letting Jimmy G get sacked. This was the delusional, the prophecy of the Niners' delusional playoff push being fulfilled, as I keep on mentioning, since week 18 or week 12 of this season. If the 49ers were going to make this delusional playoff push, this final push, they either get the playoff spot or not. And if they get the playoff spot, they're going to get smashed in the first round. That's what I kept on mentioning. But then, after being down 17-3 at halftime, they actually stormed back. They actually stormed back in the second half. And then they get the playoff spot in overtime. Ambry Thomas intercepts Matthew Stafford, and the Niners get their delusional playoff ticket as the number 6 seed. Looking at their turnaround, there were a couple things that happened. The defensive line played lights out. And you notice, in a shift into the line, Eric Armstead playing inside to create interior pressure. And like I said before, Kyle Shanahan heavily relying on the run game again, just like during the NFC Championship game. This time with Deebo Samuel, yes, playing wide receiver and running back during this stretch. So overall, in spite of their two biggest flaws in Jimmy G and the secondary, they netted a playoff berth. But the question was, how far would they go? So going into the wild card playoffs and the overall start of the playoffs, the Niners were were written off. They were total underdogs against the Dallas Cowboys, including myself. And, I was going to say, I think I said in the preview that Jimmy G was a prime candidate for MVP. I even told everyone to vote for Jimmy G for MVP. I was a non-believer because for the 49ers to advance to the next round, they really need good play from the secondary and from Jimmy Garoppolo. But they managed to find ways to win, even if it's unorthodox. And they managed to upset the Dallas Cowboys in the first round, despite the fact that Jimmy G threw a wide open interception to Dallas in the fourth quarter that began their rally. But much of their win came from the running game and the Dallas Cowboys being stupid as fuck and choking again in the playoffs. The Dallas Cowboys offense was committing a lot of penalties on offense with regards to holding or illegal formation. And then on the last play of the game, you had Dak Prescott do a quarterback draw. Like, is Mike McCarthy stupid or something? Like, what kind of play call was that? You can clearly throw the ball to Dak and then have either Amari Cooper's or Cedric Wilson catch it on the sidelines. Like, they call the QB draw with no timeouts remaining, with less than 15 seconds to go, and then they have to hurry and spike the ball and they don't get it off. Stupid. So then the divisional, you get your reward in the top seed Green Bay Packers in the cold ass freezer. And they managed to actually upset them too, and this was in spite of Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams torching their ass in the opening drive. But then they get locked in the freezer themselves too by the 49ers defense. And then they get a miracle of a special teams play in spite of Jimmy G and the offense not doing hot. They get bailed out by a blocked punt by the 49ers special teams in the final minutes of the game. And that offense gets sparked by that, so they can make a final push and have Robbie Gould kick the game-winning field goal to go to the NFC Championship game. Like, so unreal. So they go to the NFC Championship game. They find out the next day that they're going to be playing their rivals, the LA Rams, in a rematch of not just Week 10 and not just Week 18. So this is like the trilogy, the definitive edition, colliding together in a one-way ticket to the Super Bowl, and that was the NFC Championship game. So they get off to a decent start, 17-7 going to the fourth quarter, but this is when their limitations finally started to catch up to them. The Niners, again, conservative on offense. Kyle Shanahan tried to do things that wasn't working for him. He tried to get the run game going, but the Rams stuffed the box. They really sold out to stop Kyle Shanahan's biggest strength, and that was the running game. And especially during that fourth quarter, Kyle Shanahan had to go to the one guy he clearly couldn't trust since Super Bowl 54, and have him throw the ball to go ahead and close out this game. And also, the secondary all game long finally met its match against Cooper Kupp and Odell Beckham Jr. So the Rams were clearly motivated to finally win a game after losing 6 straight to the 49ers. So 49ers finally collapse against the LA Rams. They give up 2 straight field goals to the Rams in the span of, I think it was like 5 minutes. But so now they're down 20-17, and the Niners have to make something happen in this last minute and a half. But then, Jimmy G, as usual, missing wide open receivers all for much of the game. And during the 2-minute drill, during the last minute and a half of the game, they do these weird calls, and Jimmy G fails to execute them. He misses wide open receivers, and on the last play of the game, he throws what could be his last ever pass in San Francisco. He collapses under pressure. The pass rush is getting to him. Aaron Donald's getting to him. And then he just, instead of taking the sack, he just throws it away. But instead of throwing it to the sideline, he just underhand throws it. And then the linebacker, Travin Howard of the Rams, intercepts the ball and seals the game and seals their season for the 49ers. Yeah. And that pretty much, I guess you could call it an exclamation point. I guess you could call it the bow on top of the present that all tied up for the Jimmy G era of San Francisco. Looking back at the Jimmy G era, it had promise. It really did have promise. It had promise when it started with 5 games. where he lifted the franchise a little bit up the ground, morality wise, and with all the wins. But then when you get to 2018, he does decent in his first 3 starts. But then when you have the ACL tear, and then when he comes back from it, 2019, you really started to see some of the cracks fold. He looked kind of scared to move out of the pocket. He looked scared under pressure to throw the ball. He took too long to read the defense. Jimmy G was a completely different quarterback when he came back from the ACL injury. And when you look at Jimmy G pre-ACL, he looked like a better quarterback than the one we've seen from 2019 to 2021. But when we look at the team overall, for a team that was 3-5, midway point through the season, I gotta say, really surprising, but also delusional, that they made it as deep as they did, throughout, in the postseason. But when it came to nut busting time, the biggest nut busting times, in the NFC Championship game, the biggest weaknesses just came back to haunt them at a time where they were just an inch away from being in the Super Bowl in their rival stadium. So, this season ended in heartbreak for the 49ers, just a game short from going to the Super Bowl. You had actually more positives than negatives than last year's clearly injury mania filled season. Obviously, the most important thing was mostly everyone managed to stay healthy. I think the only big injuries that you had were Javon Kinlaw, Jason Verrett, and Raheem Mostert. Those were the only 3 big injuries all season long. But other than that, everyone managed to stay healthy. So that's really what's important here. And then obviously, Deebo Samuel, the clear team MVP. He was just an absolute beast for much of the season. And when Kyle Shanahan decided to use him as a multi-trick player, as that's not just a wide receiver, he clearly became the glue that kept everything together in the offense. And then when you keep staying things within the offense, Brandon Ayuk, the second-year receiver, he had a disappointing first half, but as the season went along, he managed to overcome whatever demons he had, and whatever Kyle Shanahan was trying to put in front of him, and became a strong third option behind Deebo and George Kittle. But defensively, again, the biggest strength of this team, and especially key for their playoff run, and whatever DeMeco Ryans did, their new defensive coordinator, he did really well. And then you got some solid contributions from your rookies, Elijah Mitchell and Ambry Thomas, in relief of Raheem Mostert and Jason Verrett, respectively. And then, lastly, the linebacking trio of Fred Warner, Azeez Al-Shaair, and Dre Greenlaw, really good. Really, really good. So now, again, as we go into the offseason for the 49ers, there will be some thinking, some reflecting about whether or not Trey Lance should have started over Jimmy after week 9 or week 7 or before week 10. Some will say that this was going to be a wasted season for Trey Lance because he didn't start more games over Jimmy Garbage Fail or Jimmy Garbage Pail or however you want to call Jimmy Glass. So in all honesty, would I have liked to see Trey Lance start more games? Would I have liked to see him how he would have done, how he would have led the Niners during a critical point of the season? Sure, most definitely. But would he have led the Niners to the NFC Championship game during that point? In all honesty, I don't think so. I really don't think so. For as much as we like to rag on Jimmy Garbage Fail, and how much he doesn't contribute much, he makes the critical plays when they need him the most. But then again, the thing about Trey Lance is he is an extremely raw quarterback that had relatively little competition when he was in North Dakota State. So I don't think putting Trey out there probably wouldn't have been the best decision. But hey, it wouldn't have hurt. to let him execute what he had learned so far. I mean, isn't that what the NFL is all about? The best learning experience is hands-on on the field. So, something to keep in mind throughout the offseason. Now, as for Jimmy Garoppolo, like I said, for as much crap as I given him as a player throughout the season, and I think a little bit last year when I did the recap, he's a good guy. He is a real professional. He had handled this situation with Trey Lance, Shanahan, and Lynch very, very well. Like, there was no blood boiling, no hatred between all four parties. He handled this as well as he could have. You have to give him props for that. Like, you can rag on him for being a shitty quarterback, and yes, I still rag on him for being a limited bad quarterback. But when in the locker room, when around the players, you can tell he loves that team. I'll give him that. I will give Jimmy Garoppolo that. He clearly boosts the morale of that team. He's a clear locker room leader, and wherever he goes next, he will clearly be the same guy. But the thing is, on the field, he just limits the upside of the offense that has the potential to be even greater, especially with three big players in Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, and you also have another good fourth option in Juwan Jennings, and you got a run game too that just added on the coaching end, Anthony Lynn, former coach of the Chargers, and who specializes in the run game. So, from his exit interviews, it just seems like his time in San Francisco is coming to an end. And, at the time I'm making of this episode, no, we don't know where he's going. We don't know where he's been traded. I mean, still very early to know where he's going. So, overall, I just wish Jimmy the best where he goes next. But now it's just time to move on. So, overall, when it comes to the 2021 season for the 49ers, this team overachieved with the 10-7 record, but much better than what we got last year with injury mania. But really overachieved, exceeded expectations. They went as far as the NFC Championship Game, but I will say, I guess going to the NFC Championship Game was a positive because it upped Jimmy G's trade value much more. I'm not first round pick worthy yet, I don't think, but it gives teams something to think about if they're looking for a quarterback like Jimmy G. So, going to the offseason, there are actually some things to consider for San Francisco. Unlike last year where it was just about retaining players, same thing for the 2020 offseason where they were just trying to retain key players, keep that core. This season's actually about getting some help on the defense, getting some help all around. The problem is you have very little cap room to work with. Before they even trade Jimmy Garoppolo, they only have $5 million. They only have $5 million worth to spend in free agency. So compared to the last 2 years, that is very little to spend. So the 49ers are going to have to get very creative. They're going to have to make a lot of moves if they want to address their key needs in both free agency and the draft. So looking at some of the key free agents, on the defensive side, you have DJ Jones, Arden Key on the defensive line. You have K'Wan Williams in the secondary, and then Marcel Harris. On the offensive side, you have Raheem Mostert and Lincoln Tomlinson. You also have some exclusive rights free agents like Juwan Jennings and I think Azeez Al-Shaair. So a lot of key free agents that they have to re-sign. I don't know if they're going to be keeping all of them, but at some junction, they have to keep at least some or not most of them. So some of the priorities that they have to address during this offseason, well, the number one thing they have to address first and foremost is trading Jimmy Garoppolo. They're clearly working on it right now, but that's the first thing they have to get done by the start of free agency. Because a trade or even a release, but clearly they want to get something in return. But either way, it would save the 49ers $25 million. It would give them $25 million more to work with in cap space. So by free agency, if they trade Jimmy G, they at least get $30 million to start free agency. So, you know, clearly a little more to work with on the free agency period. And you know, you get some money to for extending Deebo Samuel and Nick Bosa, which is going to be very important this offseason too. But going back to this, you know, Jimmy G made some comments about wanting to go to a team that's ready to win, and for Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, that's important for them too. But what's also important is, you know, to get some valuable compensation in return, especially, you know, because going to the draft in April, you have no first round pick. You gave this year's pick and next year's pick to the Miami Dolphins when you went up last year to get Trey Lance. So, you know, you got to get some compensation, and, you know, you gotta find a little bit of way to fleece a team of if you want to get a first round pick. But in my honest opinion, you might get multiple second rounders, if not a second rounder, or multiple third rounder, a second rounder and multiple third rounders for Jimmy G. I just say that because, you know, of his injury history, his limited ball placement, his lack of mobility outside the pocket since the ACL tear. So it's just some things for teams that are looking for a quarterback to consider. But, you know, when I look at a team that could be interested in a quarterback, I look at two that fit Jimmy G's standards, and also Shanahan and Lynch's standards. And that is the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Tampa Bay Bucks. Looking at the Steelers, you know, they have a winning culture over there. I mean, at least off the field, but on the field, they have a no nonsense tolerance when it comes to playing football. And also they have a real big need at quarterback. You know, Big Ben Roethlisberger retired a couple weeks ago, and they don't want to be going into 2022 with Mason Rudolph under center and Dwayne Haskins and whoever their fourth quarterback are free agents. So do they really want to go with Mason Rudolph? Do they really trust him after seeing a very large sample of him starting in relief of Big Ben? Do they really trust him that much? So the Steelers actually have enough cap space to sign and trade for Jimmy G, but they're gonna, like, just like with Tampa Bay, they're gonna have to, like, they have to restructure his contract so they can, like, spread it out for like a couple of years or so. So, like, with $31 million to work with for the Steelers, they can get Jimmy and then put some pieces around the offensive line, because that's one of the biggest needs for Pittsburgh is the offensive line. And if they can get Juju Smith-Schuster back, if they can get him to re-sign and then get another a third option behind Smith-Schuster and Chase Claypool, then sure, send Jimmy G to Pittsburgh. And then the other option is Tampa Bay. You know, Tom Brady is officially retired, and Jimmy G, prior to getting traded from New England in 2017, was groomed to be his successor. So, what better way now to make that dream a reality is for the Bucs front office to get their chance on that. They have a strong offensive line, and then you get a really good running game with Ronald Jones, and, you know, if they re-sign Leonard Fournette, and then you get also a really good receiving game in Mike Evans and Cameron Brate, if Rob Gronkowski doesn't come back. And then you still have a strong defensive line. You just have to work on the secondary too. So, and you have a good head coach in Bruce Arians. So, Tampa Bay, you know, still winning culture. And even if Tom Brady's retired, you know, you can get Jimmy G. It's just how much cap space does Tampa Bay have? How much contracts do they have to restructure? You know, Tampa Bay also a good option for Jimmy Garoppolo. So two teams that I could see Jimmy G possibly going in the offseason. There are also other teams like Washington, Carolina, Denver, but honestly, I'm not sure if those are the right options for him, and if for his next team. So the next priority is the secondary. That's actually the top one after the Niners trade Jimmy Garoppolo. You know, they lose Richard Sherman last offseason, and that would have lasting effects on the secondary all season. So this offseason, they need a lockdown corner. I mean, yes, I know it's going to be hard to find one, especially with the limited cap space you have, even with the trading Jimmy Garoppolo. But you need a quality corner to complete that defense, especially after this past year's disaster. So you have an above average market this coming off season, and there are much better options than what you have right now. So you got Stephon Gilmore from the Panthers, J.C. Jackson from the Patriots. Sure, they're likely going to command a high dollar. And Stephon Gilmore's on the older side, and you have another X factor, Carlton Davis from the Bucks. Those three are going to command a high dollar, but if they want to prioritize winning, they can certainly go to the 49ers. But if the 49ers need someone on the cheap, younger, and still relatively borderline good, they could look in signing guys like Charvarius Ward from the Kansas City Chiefs or the Rasul Douglas from the Green Bay Packers. Either way, they need a quality starter. They need a quality corner, because if they go into the season re-signing K'Wan Williams or taking back Josh Norman, I'm not on board with that, because they're going to be expecting Trey Lance to be Patrick Mahomes of 2018 if they do that, if they don't revamp that secondary. And last but not least, they have to address the offensive line. They have to re-sign Laken Tomlinson and, for God's sakes, retool that right side of the line, because they cannot go into 2022 with Tom Compton and Daniel Brunskill starting on that right side, let alone keep staying in that rotation, because in that back half of the 2021 season, they were god-awful. They were really god-awful pass protecting Jimmy Garoppolo. So Mike McGlinchey was injured. I forgot what point he was, but prior to that, he was below average. And then they also drafted a guard in the second round of the last year's draft, and he's yet to play. He has yet to play a snap. And if he doesn't play at any point in 2022, or he underperforms, yeah, he's a bust. So we don't know what to expect from Aaron Banks, the Notre Dame guard. But either way, they need to solidify that right side. So they got to go into this offseason addressing to signing a quality guard on the cheap. So there's three things that they got to do: trade Jimmy G, address that secondary, address the offensive line. But the first and foremost thing is trading Jimmy Garoppolo. And like I said, I wish Jimmy G the best of luck with what he has to do next. But 2022 is the Trey Lance show. And for the 49ers and John Lynch, if they can get the right pieces, the right players, for the secondary, for the offensive line, and maybe some like rotation players, for the offense, 2022 could be their chance to go one game further. If Trey Lance plays really well, it could be that one game further past the NFC Championship Game in 2022. But that's just me having high hopes. 7 months from now. So we'll see what happens during this offseason. I know we still have the Super Bowl, but man, that NFC Championship was the Super Bowl for the 49ers, and sadly, they just couldn't get over the hump. So what do you guys think, for all my Niners fans out there? What do you guys think about this past season's this past season for the 49ers? Was it a successful one? Was it a failure? Or was it just in the middle? For me, it was in the middle. I mean, you didn't have Trey Lance start, but you still got surprising and with a NFC Championship appearance. But again, it's just time to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo. What was your favorite Jimmy Garoppolo memory? What was your favorite game? Your not so favorite memory? Will you miss Jimmy G? Let me know how you feel anyway. I'll miss pre-ACL Jimmy. That's for sure. But either way, it's just time to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo. And honestly, I can't wait what's in store for Trey Lance. Hopefully, he has a good offseason and he'll steal the show in fall of 2022. Can't wait for that shit. But that is it for this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. Thank you for tuning in to this long recap of the San Francisco 49ers 2021. And probably the last time in a while that I'm going to be talking about them, unless there's some free agency stuff that happens, like the trade for the Jimmy G's trade or some key free agency signings for San Francisco. But for a little while, this has been the last time I'm going to be talking about San Francisco in regards to the 2021 season. But thank you for tuning in to this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I am your host, Dylan Lasagna. Thank you for tuning in to episode 90 of this freezing cold podcast. Make sure you listen to the show however you can and wherever you get your podcasts, be it YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor FM, and Google Podcasts. Follow the show on social media on Twitter and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. And keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of pro wrestling and sports. Icy and spicy like that Very Cold Lasagna. And for all my Niners faithful, until September. Until September. And I guess if you want to count the draft, but until September or April or year round for Niners fans, for all NFL fans, peace out.